So Heifetz describes leadership actually as a danger sport, and says that actually it's not the heroic kind of high-profile work that we often imagine it is, and that it requires a very thick skin and a great deal of patience and a willingness to hold open that space. What Keats the poet called negative capability, to not think, bring things to a resolution. I think Obama did that very well early on in his first presidency, of actually refusing to come down firmly on a simple position on kind of various issues, healthcare or what was going on in the Middle East. Um, so this uncertainty, this means, of course, is that you have to develop that negative capability, as Keats called it, the ability to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that also suggests why reading alone isn't enough. So looking back over the years of the strategic leadership program, I think over time we developed quite a sophisticated understanding of the different kind of complexion of activities that needed to be involved. So absolutely yes, there needed to be a strong intellectual and cognitive component to stretch people and to challenge them to explore the latest ideas, but simply and only to do that would be too remote for the practitioners who are the people that were coming on the program. So leadership from a very practical perspective, as something practiced by somebody with decisions to make and responsibilities that they hold. It's not good enough to take a kind of academic arm's length view. And so the bookish, purely intellectual cognitive approach clearly has limits whilst being of value in terms of stimulus. And so part of the program also would be to involve and engage people emotionally and experientially, and thus turning to the arts and the humanities. And some of that would have a stronger intellectual strand than others. So to explore perhaps classic texts with John Lennox through Socratic dialogue, where we're absolutely not in search of an answer, but in search of uncovering and revealing ever greater depths in the passage from Plato's Cave, or a dilemma posed by Václav Havel. And John himself sort of embodying that spirit of endless, open, boundless inquiry, and inviting people into that space of not knowing. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum, all the way through to Peter Hankey having people conduct a choir with no knowledge or prior expertise in music. In fact, for many of them, who some of them did have musical experience, that would be a handicap. And really to see the opportunity of leading the choir, of conducting a choir, as a sort of metaphor, but also as a physical reality for a generalist who stands in front of a group of specialists and has at their disposal sort of the spectrum of bodily communication. And this short circuits all the kind of intellectual cognitive channels and gets straight to the sort of emotional root of things. And this is a very important space for people to explore. And so by doing exercises like that, people would learn and reveal and discover things about themselves, whether it was how they coped with anxiety, whether it was something that showed up in their particular style, whether it was their unwillingness to actually get out there in front of the choir and sort of say to them, hey, this is what I want. And, you know, in a similar vein, working with horses, where you can't reason with them, and yet somehow you want to be able to lead them. I'll never forget one of our participants, Tim Gerstner from the States, getting quite frustrated with this horse that he just couldn't cajole or persuade to follow him, and he actually sort of threw in the towel at one point and turned around and, with very sort of firm body language, strode off across the enclosure, at which point the horse followed him. And this was a huge revelation for him, because it made him see that in some ways he was trying too hard, and he was trying to be too consensual in his leadership, and that sometimes leadership required just heading off and expecting and assuming that people will follow in the way that the horse did. So all these alternative methods of using music and animals, of having people reflect through various artistic forms, whether it's discussing a poem over dinner at Concept Cafe, or exploring Shakespeare in the company of Richard Olivier, are ways of accessing this kind of rich, complex body of knowledge that won't be submitted to a single definition, and invoking, you know, the whole brain, the whole person. So obviously right and left brain, analytical and emotional, but also integrating all of that and learning to trust and understand and know intuition and instinct, to appreciate that when we act in the absence of numeric data, that we're not acting on the basis of nothing. I think this is something people struggle with these days. We tend to assume that data is something that you can put in a chart and analyze and put on a graph, but in actual fact, working with these more elusive forms, you realize that no, there is a feeling that doesn't feel right. I want this to go faster. I want it to go slower, or I'd like the horse to follow me. Whatever it is, that these are still sources of information which a leader needs to be able to cope with and manage and work with. So that leadership involves coping with this uncertainty and using the whole person and having the ability to reflect and see yourself in context as well. So from the Henry story, the necessity that Henry has to sort of step outside the role of leadership and to take counsel with his bosom, as he puts it, and at some point with his brother, with his mentor or confidant. And so you've got this mixture here of kind of stimulus and stretch, of exploring these other media, of narrative intelligence, of the world of mythos as well as the world of logos, of doing this in many different ways, and then of having the power, the opportunity to actually reflect upon that and to reflect upon yourself and to reflect upon how you interact with your context. And I think, to sum up, what over 10 years I found striking was that as often as not, people who came on the program would say that what they really got from it was a sense that they're not alone, so a sense of shared struggle, and that was greatly reassuring for them, even if it didn't offer them actually any solutions. The old adage of it being lonely at the top sort of really coming home to roost, and people realizing that a headmaster running a school for children with learning difficulties will share many of the dilemmas and issues that somebody running a large pharmaceutical business may face, and therefore a sense in which, well, I'm not mad, or it's not just me, or it's not just coming down to my own incapabilities. And so that sense of being in the company of friendly strangers, I think, was very powerful for people. And the second thing, which was very consistent over time, which connects back to the point about reflection, was the sheer pleasure and the enormous value of having time out to think. And I think this raises many questions about the way that our leaders are put under pressure today, and senior leaders aren't given time to reflect. They're not given time to connect with themselves, to connect with nature, to actually think through with pause the decisions that they have to make. And I think that's a great loss and a big problem. And I think that's something that we'll be seeking to do with the Praxis program, is to create lots of different vessels and containers and spaces where people can have these more distant reflections, not as some kind of luxury or health spa, but as a very important, very practical part of developing their own leadership and making practical leadership decisions. That if you're on the job the whole time, and if technology is pressuring you to make quicker and quicker responses, the chances that you'll make wise decisions, the chances that you'll be strategic in the way that you think and act and behave, are increasingly remote. And I think that's one of the things that we'll continue to explore.